Although I regarded authorship as a waste of time, I continued to write during those 15 years. I had tasted of the seduction of authorship, of the seduction of enormous monetary remunerations and applauses for my insignificant labor, and so I submitted to it, as being a means for improving my material condition and for stifling in my soul all questions about the meaning of my life and life in general. In my writings I advocated, what to me was the only truth, that it was necessary to live in such a way as to derive the greatest comfort for oneself and one's family. Thus I proceeded to live, but 5 years ago something very strange began to happen to me. I was overcome, by minutes at first, of perplexity, and then of an arrest of life, as though I did not know how to live or what to do, and I lost myself and was dejected. But that passed, and I continued to live as before. Then those minutes of perplexity were repeated oftener, and always in one and the same form. These arrests of life found their expression in ever the same questions. Why? Well, and then? At first I thought that those were simply aimless, inappropriate questions. It seemed to me that that was all well known, and that if I ever wanted to busy myself with their solution, it would not cost me much labor, that now I had no time to attend to them, but that if I wanted to, I should find the proper answers. But the questions began to repeat themselves oftener and oftener, answers were demanded more and more persistently, and, like dots that fall on the same spot, these questions, without any answers, thickened into one black blotch. There happened what happens with any person who falls ill with a mortal internal disease. At first there appear insignificant symptoms of indisposition, to which the patient pays no attention. Then these symptoms are repeated more and more frequently, and blend into one temporally indivisible suffering. The suffering keeps growing, and before the patient has had time to look around, he becomes conscious that what he took for an indisposition is the most significant thing in the world to him, is death. The same happened with me. I understood that it was not a passing indisposition, but something very important, and that, if the questions were going to repeat themselves, it would be necessary to find an answer for them. And I tried to answer them. The questions seemed to be so foolish, simple, and childish. But the moment I touched them and tried to solve them, I became convinced, in the first place, that they were not childish and foolish, but very important and profound questions in life, and, in the second, that no matter how much I might try, I should not be able to answer them. Before attending to my Samara estate, to my son's education, or to the writings of a book, I ought to know why I should do that. So long as I did not know why, I could not do anything. I could not live. Amidst my thoughts of farming, which interested me very much during that time, there would suddenly pass through my head a question like this. All right, you are going to have 6,000 Tessiatinas of land in the government of Samara, and 300 horses. And then? And I completely lost my senses and did not know what to think farther. Or, when I thought of the education of my children, I said to myself, why? Or, reflecting on the manner in which the masses might obtain their welfare, I suddenly said to myself, what is that to me? Or, thinking of the fame which my works would get me, I said to myself, all right, you'll be more famous than Gogol, Pushkin, Shakespeare, Molière, and all the writers in the world. What of it? And I was absolutely unable to make any reply. The questions were not waiting, and I had to answer them at once. If I did not answer them, I could not live. I felt that what I was standing on had given way, that I had no foundation to stand on, and that which I lived by no longer existed, and that I had nothing to live by. All that happened with me when I was on every side surrounded by what is considered to be complete happiness. I had a good, loving, and beloved wife, good children, and a large estate, which grew and increased without any labor on my part. I was respected by my neighbors and friends, more than ever before, was praised by strangers, and, without any self-deception, could consider my name famous. With all that, I was not deranged or mentally unsound. On the contrary, I was in full command of my mental and physical powers, such as I had hardly met with in people of my age. Physically, I could work in a field, mowing, without falling behind a peasant. Mentally, I could work from 8 to 10 hours in succession, without experiencing any consequences from the strain. And while in such condition I arrived at the conclusion that I could not live, and, fearing death, I had to use cunning against myself, in order that I might not take my life. This mental condition expressed itself to me in this form. My life is a stupid, mean trick played on me by somebody. Although I did not recognize that somebody as having created me, the form of the conception that someone had played a mean, stupid trick on me by bringing me into the world was the most natural one that presented itself to me. Involuntarily, I imagined that there, somewhere, There was somebody who was now having fun as he looked down upon me and saw me, who had lived for 30 or 40 years, learning, developing, growing in body and mind, now that I had become strengthened in mind and had reached that summit of life from which it lay all before me, standing as a complete fool on that summit and seeing clearly that there was nothing in life and never would be. And that was fun to him. But whether there was or was not that somebody who made fun of me did not make it easier for me. I could not ascribe any sensible meaning to a single act or to my whole life. I was only surprised that I had not understood that from the start. All that had long ago been known to everybody. Sooner or later there would come diseases and death, they'd come already, to my dear ones and to me, and there'd be nothing left but stench and worms. All my affairs, no matter what they might be, would sooner or later be forgotten, and I myself should not exist. So why should I worry about all these things? How could a man fail to see that and live? That was surprising. A person could live only so long as he was drunk, but the moment he sobered up, he could not help seeing that all that was only a deception, and a stupid deception at that. Really, there was nothing funny and ingenious about it, but only something cruel and stupid. Long ago has been told the Eastern story about the traveler who in the steppe is overtaken by an infuriated beast. Trying to save himself from the animal, the traveler jumps into a waterless well. But at its bottom he sees a dragon who opens his jaws in order to swallow him. And the unfortunate man does not dare climb out, lest he perish from the infuriated beast. And he does not dare jump down to the bottom of the well, lest he be devoured by the dragon, and so clutches the twig of a wild bush growing in a cleft of the well, and holds on to it. His hands grow weak, and he feels that soon he shall have to surrender to the peril which awaits him at either side. But he still holds on and sees two mice, one white, the other black, in even measure making a circle around the main trunk of the bush to which he is clinging, and nibbling at it on all sides. Now, at any moment, the bush will break and tear off, and he will fall into the dragon's jaws. The traveler sees that, and knows that he will inevitably perish. But while he's still clinging, he sees some drops of honey hanging on the leaves of the bush, and so reaches out for them with his tongue and licks the leaves. Just so, I hold on to the branch of life, knowing that the dragon of death is waiting inevitably for me, ready to tear me to pieces, and I cannot understand why I have fallen on such suffering. And I try to lick that honey which used to give me pleasure, but now it no longer gives me joy. And the white and the black mouse, day and night, nibble at the branch to which I am holding on. I clearly see the dragon, and the honey is no longer sweet to me. I see only the inevitable dragon and the mice, and am unable to turn my glance from them. That is not a fable, but a veritable, indisputable, comprehensible truth. The former deception of the pleasures of my life, which stifled the terror of the dragon, no longer deceives me. No matter how much one should say to me, "You cannot understand the meaning of life. Do not think, live." I am unable to do so, because I have been doing it too long before. Now I cannot help seeing day and night, which run and lead me up to death. I see that alone, because that alone is the truth. Everything else is a lie. The 2 drops of honey that have longest turned my eyes away from the cruel truth, the love of family and of authorship, which I have called an art, are no longer sweet to me. My family, I said to myself. But my family, my wife and children, they are also human beings. They are in precisely the same condition that I am in. They must either live in the lie or see the terrible truth. Why should they live? Why should I love them? Why guard, raise, and watch them? Is it for the same despair which is in me, or for dullness of perception? Since I love them, I cannot conceal the truth from them. Every step in cognition leads them up to this truth, and the truth is death. Art, poetry. For a long time, under the influence of the success of human praise, I tried to persuade myself that that was a thing which could be done. Even though death should come and destroy everything, my deeds as well as my memory of them. But soon I came to see that, too, was a deception. It was clear to me that art was an adornment of life, a decoy of life, but life lost all its attractiveness to me. How, then, could I entrap others? So long as I did not live my own life, and a strange life bore me on its waves, so long as I believed that life had some sense, although I was not able to express it, the reflections of life of every deception in poetry and in the arts afforded me pleasure, and I was delighted to look at life through this little mirror of art. But when I began to look for the meaning of life, when I experienced the necessity of living myself, that little mirror became either useless, superfluous, and ridiculous, or painful to me. I could no longer console myself with what I saw in the mirror, namely, that my situation was stupid and desperate. It was all right for me to rejoice, so long as I believed in the depth of my soul that life had some sense. At that time, the play of lights, of the comical, the tragical, the touching, the beautiful, the terrible in life, afforded me amusement. But when I knew that life was meaningless and terrible, the play in the little mirror could no longer amuse me. No sweetness of honey could be sweet to me when I saw the dragon and the mice that were nibbling down my support. In my search after the question of life, I experienced the same feeling which a man who has lost his way in the forest may experience. He comes to a clearing, climbs a tree, and clearly sees an unlimited space before him. At the same time he sees that there are no houses there, and that there can be none. He goes back to the forest, into the darkness, and he sees darkness. And again there are no houses. Thus I blundered in this forest of human knowledge, between the clearings of the mathematical and experimental sciences, which disclosed to me clear horizons, but such in the direction of which there could be no house, and between the darkness of the speculative sciences, where I sunk into a deeper darkness the further I proceeded, and I convinced myself at last that there was no way out and could not be. By abandoning myself to the bright side of knowledge, I saw that I only turned my eyes away from the question. No matter how enticing and clear the horizons were that were disclosed to me, no matter how enticing it was to bury myself in the infinitude of this knowledge, I comprehended that these sciences were the more clear the less I needed them, the less they answered my question. Well, I know, I said to myself, all which science wants so persistently to know, but there is no answer to the question about the meaning of my life. But in the speculative sphere, I saw that, in spite of the fact that the aim of the knowledge was directed straight to the answer of my question, or because of that fact, there could be no other answer than what I was giving to myself. What is the meaning of my life? None. Or, what will come of my life? Nothing. Or, why does everything which exists exist, and why do I exist? Because it exists. Putting the question to the one side of human knowledge, I received an endless quantity of exact answers about what I did not ask, about the chemical composition of the stars, about the movement of the sun towards the constellation of Hercules, about the origin of species and of man, about the forms of infinitely small, imponderable particles of ether. But the answer in this sphere of knowledge to my question, what the meaning of my life was always, you are what you call your life. You are a temporal, accidental conglomeration of particles. The interrelation, the change of these particles, produces in you that which you call life. This congeries will last for some time, then the interaction of these particles will cease, and that which you call life and all your questions will come to an end. You are an accidentally cohering globule of something. The globule is fermenting. This fermentation the globule calls its life. The globule falls to pieces, and all fermentation and all questions will come to an end. Thus the clear side of knowledge answers, and it cannot say anything else, if only it strictly follows its principles. With such an answer, it appears that the answer is not a reply to the question. I want to know the meaning of my life, but the fact that it is a particle of the infinite not only gives it no meaning, but even destroys every possible meaning. Those obscure transactions, which this side of the experimental, exact science has with speculation, when it says that the meaning of life consists in evolution and the cooperation with this evolution, because of their obscurity and inexactness, cannot be regarded as answers. The other side of knowledge, the speculative, so long as it sticks strictly to its fundamental principle in giving a direct answer to the question, everywhere and at all times is answered one and the same. The world is something infinite and incomprehensible. Human life is an incomprehensible part of this incomprehensible all. I lived for a long time in this madness, which, not in words but in deeds, is particularly characteristic of us, the most liberal and learned of men. But thanks either to my strange physical love for the real working class, which made me understand it and see that it is not so stupid as we suppose, or to the sincerity of my conviction, which was that I could know nothing and that the best that I could do was to hang myself, I felt that if I ever wanted to live and understand the meaning of life, I ought naturally to look for it, not among those who had lost the meaning of life and wanted to kill themselves, but among those billions departed and living men who had been carrying their own lives and ours upon their shoulders. And I looked around at the enormous masses of deceased and living men, not learned and wealthy, but simple men, and I saw something quite different. I saw that all these billions of men that lived or had lived, all with rare exceptions, did not fit into my subdivisions, and that I could not recognize them as not understanding the question, because they themselves put it and answered it with surprising clearness. Nor could I recognize them as Epicureans, because their lives were composed rather of privations and suffering than of enjoyment. Still less could I recognize them as senselessly living out their meaningless lives, because every act of theirs and death itself was explained by them. They regarded it as the greatest evil to kill themselves. It appeared, then, that all humanity was in possession of a knowledge of the meaning of life, which I did not recognize and which I condemned. It turned out that rational knowledge did not give any meaning to life, excluded life, while the meaning which by billions of people, by all humanity, was ascribed to life was based on some despised false knowledge. The rational knowledge in the person of the learned and the wise denied the meaning of life, but the enormous masses of men, all humanity, recognized this meaning in an irrational knowledge. This irrational knowledge was faith, the same that I could not help but reject. That was God is one and three, the creation in 6 days, devils and angels, and all that which I could not accept so long as I had not lost my senses. My situation was a terrible one. I knew that I should not find anything on the path of rational knowledge but the negation of life, and there, in faith, nothing but the negation of reason, which was still more impossible than the negation of life. From the rational knowledge it followed that life was an evil and men knew it. It depended on men whether they should cease living, and yet they lived and continued to live. And I myself lived, though I had known long ago that life was meaningless and an evil. From faith it followed that, in order to understand life, I must renounce reason, for which alone a meaning was needed. There resulted a contradiction, from which there were two ways out. Either what I called rational was not so rational as I had thought, or that which to me appeared irrational was not so irrational as I had thought. And I began to verify the train of thoughts of my rational knowledge. In verifying the train of thoughts of my rational knowledge, I found that it was quite correct. The deduction that life was nothing was inevitable, but I saw a mistake. The mistake was that I had not reasoned in conformity with the question put by me. The question was, why should I live? That is, what real, indestructible essence will come from my phantasmal, destructible life? What meaning has my finite existence in this infinite world? And in order to answer this question, I studied life. The solutions of all possible questions of life apparently could not satisfy me, because my question, no matter how simple it appeared in the beginning, included the necessity of explaining the finite through the infinite, and vice versa. I asked, what is the extratemporal, extracausal, extraspatial meaning of life? But I gave an answer to the question, what is the temporal, causal, spatial meaning of my life? The result was that after a long labor of mine, I answered, none. In my reflections, I constantly equated, nor could I do otherwise, the finite with the finite, the infinite with the infinite, and so from that resulted precisely what had to result. Force was force, matter was matter, will was will, infinity was infinity, nothing was nothing, and nothing else could come from it. There happens something like what at times takes place in mathematics. You think you're solving an equation when you have only an identity. The reasoning is correct, but you receive as a result the answer A equals A, or X equals X, or 0 equals 0. The same happened with my reflection in respect to the question about the meaning of life. The answers given by all science to that question are only identities. Indeed, the strictly scientific knowledge, that knowledge which, as Descartes did, begins with a full doubt in everything, rejects all knowledge which has been taken on trust, and builds everything anew on the laws of reason and experience, cannot give any other answer to the question of life than what I received, an indefinite answer. It only seemed to me at first that science gave me a positive answer. Schopenhauer's answer. Life has no meaning. It is an evil. But when I analyzed the matter, I saw that the answer was not a positive one, but that it was only my feeling which expressed it as such. The answer, strictly expressed, as it is expressed by the Brahmins, by Solomon, and by Schopenhauer, is only an indefinite answer or an identity. 0 equals 0. Life is nothing. Thus the philosophical knowledge does not negate anything, but only answers that the question cannot be solved by it, that for philosophy the solution remains insoluble. When I saw that, I understood that it was not right for me to look for an answer to my question in rational knowledge, and that the answer given by rational knowledge was only an indication that the answer might be got if the question were differently put, but only when into the discussion of the question should be introduced the question of the relation of the finite to the infinite. I also understood that, no matter how irrational and monstrous the answers might be that faith gave, they had this advantage that they introduced into each answer the relation of the finite to the infinite, without which there could be no answer. No matter how I may put the question, how must I live? The answer is, according to God's law. What real result will there be from my life? Eternal torment or eternal bliss? What is the meaning which is not destroyed by death? The union with infinite God, paradise. Thus, outside the rational knowledge, which had to me appeared as the only one, I was inevitably led to recognize that all living humanity had a certain other irrational knowledge, faith, which made it possible to live. All the irrationality of faith remained the same for me, but I could not help recognizing that it alone gave to humanity answers to the questions of life and, in consequence of them, the possibility of living. The rational knowledge brought me to the recognition that life was meaningless. My life stopped, and I wanted to destroy myself. When I looked around at people, at all humanity, I saw that people lived and asserted that they knew the meaning of life. I looked back at myself. I lived so long as I knew the meaning of life. As to other people, so even to me, did faith give the meaning of life and the possibility of living. Looking again at the people of other countries, contemporaries of mine and those passed away, I saw again the same. Where life had been, their faith, ever since humanity had existed, had given the possibility of living, and the chief features of faith were everywhere one and the same. No matter what answers faith may give, its every answer gives to the finite existence of man the sense of the infinite, a sense which is not destroyed by suffering, privation, and death. Consequently, in faith alone could we ever find the meaning and possibility of life. What, then, was faith? I understood that faith was not merely an evidence of things not seen, and so forth, not revelation, that is only the description of one of the symptoms of faith, not the relation of man to man, faith has to be defined, and then God, not first God, and faith through him, not merely an agreement with what a man was told, as faith was generally understood, that faith was the knowledge of the meaning of human life, in consequence of which man did not destroy himself, but lived. Faith is the power of life. If a man lives, he believes in something. If he did not believe that he ought to live for some purpose, he would not live. If he does not see and understand the phantasm of the finite, he believes in that infinite. If he understands the phantasm of the finite, he must believe in the infinite. Without faith, one cannot live. In order that all humanity may be able to live, in order that they may continue living, giving a meaning to life, they, those billions, must have another, a real knowledge of faith. For not the fact that I, with Solomon and Schopenhauer, did not kill myself, convinced me of the existence of faith, but that these billions had lived and had borne us, me and Solomon, on the waves of life. Then I began to cultivate the acquaintance of the believers from among the poor, the simple and unlettered folk, of pilgrims, monks, dissenters, peasants. The doctrine of these people from among the masses was also the Christian doctrine that the quasi-believers of our circle professed. With the Christian truths were also mixed in very many superstitions, but there was this difference. The superstitions of our circle were quite unnecessary to them, had no connection with their lives, were only a kind of an Epicurean amusement, while the superstitions of the believers from among the laboring classes were to such an extent blended with their life that it would have been impossible to imagine it without these superstitions. It was a necessary condition of that life. I began to examine closely the lives and beliefs of these people, and the more I examined them, the more did I become convinced that they had the real faith, that their faith was necessary for them, and that it alone gave them a meaning and possibility of life. In contradistinction to what I saw in our circle, where life without faith was possible, and where hardly 1 in 1,000 professed to be a believer, among them there was hardly 1 in 1,000 who was not a believer. In contradistinction to what I saw in our circle, where all life passes in idleness, amusements, and tedium of life, I saw that the whole life of these people was passed in hard work, and that they were satisfied with life. In contradistinction to the people of our circle, who struggled and murmured against fate because of their privations and their suffering, these people accepted diseases and sorrows without any perplexity or opposition, but with the calm and firm conviction that it was all for the good. In contradistinction to the fact that the more intelligent we are, the less do we understand the meaning of life, and the more do we see a kind of bad joke in our suffering and death, these people live, suffer, and approach death, and suffer in peace, and more often in joy. In contradistinction to the fact that a calm death, a death without terror or despair, is the greatest exception in our circle, a restless, insubmissive, joyless death is one of the greatest exceptions among the masses. And of such people who are deprived of everything which for Solomon and for me constitutes the only good of life, and who withal experience the greatest happiness, there's an enormous number. I cast a broader glance about me. I examined the life of past and present vast masses of men, and I saw people who in like manner had understood the meaning of life, who had known how to live and die, not 2, not 3, not 10, but hundreds, thousands, millions. All of them, infinitely diversified as to habits, intellect, culture, situation, all equally and quite contrary to my ignorance, knew the meaning of life and of death, worked calmly, bore privations and suffering, lived and died, seeing in that not vanity, but good. I began to love these people. The more I penetrated into their life, the life of the men now living, and the life of men departed, of whom I had read and heard, the more did I love them, and the easier it became for me to live. Thus I lived for about 2 years, and within me took a place of transformation, which had long been working within me, and the germ of which had always been in me. What happened with me was that the life of our circle of the rich and the learned not only disgusted me, but even lost all its meaning. All our acts, reflections, sciences, arts, all that appeared to me in a new light. I saw that all that was mere pampering of the appetites, and that no meaning could be found in it. The life of all the working masses, of all humanity, which created life, presented itself to me in its real significance. I saw that that was life itself, and that the meaning given to this life was truth, and I accepted it.